the 80s slasher librarian.
Hello, kiddies. Tonight's story, Tales from the Crypt, Demon Night, Chapter 8. There was something about the old basement that Geralene felt comfortable with. In a strange way, it was like discovering a new home. She was hunched in one corner with a tall red candle stuck into the dirt beside her, watching the shadows around her flicker and shift as it burned. It appeared to Geralene that the church overhead, which was now a motel, Irene, go to hell by the by, had been built on the foundation of a much older building, maybe a farmhouse that burned to the ground. Maybe a general store that supplied the early settlers with food and tools. It was obvious anyway that this basement was not a part of the original structure of Irene's motel overhead. When things had gotten too hairy with Irene in the past, Geralene had found this place to be a good refuge until the storm had blown over. There had been a time not long ago that Irene had chased her around with a lamp, swearing she would smash it over her head. Another time, she was trying to whip her with an electrical cord Geralene had accidentally severed while using the old Black & Decker ripsaw to cut replacement pieces for the motel's outer siding. Geralene was convinced that Irene did not know there was a basement here. Despite her fire and brimstone, she was basically a frightened old woman trying to make it in a hard and cruel world. To get down here, you had to duck into the closet that had the preserves in it. Feel around with your foot until a piece of the flooring gave way slightly, then bend and remove the trap door. The best part was that once you were on the makeshift ladder beneath it and had lowered the trap door back into place, no one could ever find you. At least not Irene, and who should know that place better than her? Only Geralene, who had combed every inch of this old structure, from the ridiculous old steeple overhead that had once housed a church bell and was now full of leaves and cobwebs and bird nests, all the way to down here, where nobody ever came. It was much the same reason she had memorized the layout of the women's prison. She had to keep one step ahead of her captors, if the time ever came to escape. There was another secret thing she did down here besides hide from Irene, actually. The crumbling walls were made of old brittle bricks, and at a spot just to her right, at about shoulder level, as she sat in the dirt, was a pack of cigarettes jammed inside a deep crack. In the work-release probation program, she was not allowed to use drugs or alcohol or tobacco, as if a puff of pot or a can of beer or a cigarette might send her on a wild killing frenzy. The wonder was that caffeine was not on the list that she was supposed to abide by. So down here, smirking at her captors and their rules, she could break the law in peace. The cigarette of choice tonight was a Chesterfield, which her secret supplier had bought the last time he went to the store in Avery. Her supplier was none other than Wally Enfield, whom she had befriended on her first day here. At first, the boarding house, motel, rumors were that Wally was not operating on all 8 cylinders, was addicted to both the post office job he loved and addicted to his love for a certain unnamed person who happened to live here. Gosh, golly gee, who could that be? But by talking with him one evening, by gently acquiring a sense of who he was, Geralene arrived at her own opinion of the man. None of his cylinders were firing at all. Yes, he was crazy in love. Irene was crazy about her shoddy motel. Cordelia was crazy about men who made her feel young again. Everybody who roomed here was crazy in one way or another. Maybe that's why Breaker seemed to fall into place so well, she supposed. That was why, when the stuntmen in the designer wetsuit showed up, nobody killed over dead on the spot. The Mission Inn was always open to such types. They merely had to sign the register and watch an evening of TV programs that had no sound, fall asleep to the rhythm of Cordelia's squeaking bed springs as she humped a customer, and arise to the clang of Geralene's serving spoon against the breakfast pot. She leaned a bit and pulled the pack of cigarettes out from between the bricks. It was not so much an addiction with her, as she could take these or leave them. It was basically her style of getting away with something, anything, that Irene Galvin did not know about. The candle made a handy lighter. She leaned back again and blew a leisurely cloud of smoke toward the ceiling, which was, of course, the floor for everyone above. Between the thick, dark beams that held everything up were cobwebs. Acres of cobwebs. What were they really, she wondered? Actual spider webs or just strands of collected dust? There was no evidence of spiders down here. What the hell could they catch and eat anyway? It was like the dark side of the moon, and it smelled like dirt and mold. With a small shrug, she pushed the pack of cigarettes back into the proper crack, and regarded the darkness outside her circle of light. Were there some secret things here that she had not yet found? The place was actually huge, though barely deep enough to stand in. The dirt floor was a convolution of lumps and valleys. The air was as dry as sandpaper despite the rain outside. The dark spoke of age and forgotten things, of the dead people who had dug this basement, the dead people who had laid these bricks. Knock it off, she warned herself. Once or twice she had gotten scared down here, but not by any ghost that she knew of. Her candle had twice sputtered out on a sudden gust of breeze. But where could a breeze come from? She had heard, just as she was lighting a cigarette a few weeks ago, a long and unhappy moan drift out of the darkness. Rather than dash up from here and burst through the trapdoor in terror, she had made herself small and waited for it to go away. She had years ago learned a great lesson among the many lessons of her life, and it was this: do not fear the dead. It is the bastards who are still alive that you need to worry about. She went back to her cigarette again, trying not to think of anything but the local calendar that was inching, day by day, toward the time of her freedom. What would she do on that blessed day? Fly to Paris, fly to Rome? Bask in the luxury of a Mediterranean beach? Sip wine with the Count and Countess? She spit in the dirt between her knees. Chesterfield sucked, and so did her dreams. She had grown up with a mother who was quick with a fist, and a father who did not exist. Paris attracted her because it was the only faraway place she had known of as a child, and seemed romantic, judging by the pictures. Well, here she was at age of 20, sitting in the dirt of an ancient basement, sneaking a smoke and waiting for her work release time to be over, so that she could leave. She had made no progress toward her goal, and the goal itself was mightily reduced. Instead of aching to go to Paris, she was aching simply to get the hell out of New Mexico. She brought the cigarette close to her face and blew across its orange tip, creating a shower of sparks that spiraled crazily into the darkness. Her life was like them, in a terrible way. She was wild and hot as sparks, but fate kept blowing more darkness her way. Darkness that threatened to extinguish her. This deal with Breaker all of a sudden, who in the hell was he anyway? He pops in from nowhere and all hell breaks loose, literally. Demons of various shapes and sizes crawl out of the night. The sheriff gets killed by a guy who looks like Billy the Kid in designer jeans. Breaker uses drops of blood to seal up windows and doors. Lines of fire burst alive when he does, and on and on. Sudden, sour-smelling air gusted across her. The candle flickered and then went out. Geralene pressed her back against the wall, frozen in place with the cigarette halfway to her mouth, her eyes jerking open as wide as they could get. The smell of smoky wax drifted up from the dead candle, burning her eyes. Something, off to the right, some kind of presence, some kind of thing. She could feel it, feel that she was no longer alone. Impossible, she told herself. This basement was dark and dry, and nothing, save a handful of starving spiders, could possibly be down here. She heard something that rustled. An image popped into her mind. Breaker's demons, having slaughtered everyone upstairs, were converging on her now. The gust of wind had been the foul breath of one of the things. All were down here encircling her in this utter blackness. Her heart squeezed painfully inside of her chest. Her blood thumped hard in her veins. She had matches. She simply had to light one, look around, chide herself for being the fool, and light the candle again. But she couldn't. Being killed by demons had to be a lousy way to die. Death by lighting a match, seeing them and going insane with terminal fright, that would be worse. She waited, breathless, her senses as keen as an antelope's when it sniffs lion in the air. Sweat sprang alive on her forehead and began to trickle into her eyes, but still, nothing. She was breathing as quietly through her open mouth as she could, needing more oxygen but not daring to take it. Torn between a future of wildly scooping out a hole in the dirt in which to hide or jumping up in the dark and trying to make it to the trap door. No longer could she convince herself that monsters do not exist. They were real, and they were here because Breaker had brought them. The last survivors of Wormwood would all be dead by morning. A gentle puff of dust struck the top of her hand. She clenched her teeth together to keep from screaming. Tiny tentacles tickled her knuckles. A cold nose pressed against her little finger. Unable to hold on any longer, she whipped to the side and tried to gouge the Chesterfield into the creature's face. It worked. The cigarette exploded into a starburst of orange sparks. Irene's cat let out a high-pitched squeal and jumped on Geralene's chest, skittered her way up to the top of her head, and stood on all fours with her claws hooked into Geralene's scalp. Before her mind could decode what had happened, Geralene let out a crazy screech and batted the cat away, simultaneously jumping to her feet. The top of her head thunked hard against a floor joist, and she dropped down again, dazed and finally understanding. She jumped back against the brick wall, with her head bruised and bloody, and let her eyes fall shut. Just the cat, she was thinking. Just the fucking cat. In the horror movies, it was funny when everybody went apeshit, and the monster turned out to be the cat. It was the oldest trick in the book, a cliché, the sure mark of a screenwriter needing a vacation. But it was real here. The cat had scared years out of her life, and she didn't know if she should scoop Cleo up and hug her, or scoop her up and smash her brains out against the wall, the terrorizing little black bitch. Instead, she set about lighting the candle again, but her shaking hands botched the job 4 times before she got it going. Chapter 9. Wally Enfield was actually 2 people on the bleak night at the Mission Inn. The happiest man on earth and the most frustrated man on earth. After more than a year of secretly adoring Cordelia, of opening doors for her and offering chairs to her, of hauling a breakfast tray upstairs for her when she had worked too hard and not gotten enough sleep, after a year of this, she had finally noticed him as more than just scrawny, comical Wally Enfield. The boarder here who happened to work at the post office up in Junction City until getting fired today. No, she now knew the depth of his love. She would abandon prostitution, marry him. They would buy a house someplace, any place that wasn't Wormwood. Wally could have left Wormwood a long time ago, but he had sacrificed his happiness in order to be with Cordelia. And now, presto, he shoots a demon and becomes her hero. Why hadn't he thought of it years ago? Then the frustration intrudes. They were in love. Sheer bliss awaited. But fate had pushed the hold button on the telephone of life. Happiness was delayed until the boarding house was no longer besieged by demons. Demons! And everybody thought Romeo and Juliet were star-crossed lovers. The pansies. He and Cordelia were sitting together on the carpeted steps that led upstairs, ready to bolt upwards if things got sticky again. Wally was holding her large hands in his clammy, smaller hands, inhaling the glory of her perfume, knowing that at last he had earned the key to the secrets of her womanhood. Nearly swooning, he said, "I wonder what time it is." She kissed him lightly on the tip of his nose. "You've got a watch on, silly." She lifted his wrist, cocking her head to see. "Just barely past midnight, if this guy on the dial is pointing right. That's not a Mickey Mouse watch, is it?" He shook his head. "It's He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. The little guy on the second hand is Skeletor. They're enemies." She stared at him uneasily, then smiled. "You'd make a great father someday, Wally." He giggled. "You'd make a great mother, too. You would, Cordelia." They both were seized by a spasm of laughter. Just as Wally was ready to either quit laughing or upchuck, A shadow fell over them, and he looked up. Roach, with his muscles stuffed inside a greasy t-shirt, he looked like a short-order cook at a biker bar. He inspected Wally up and down, snorted, and focused on Cordelia. "You and me gotta talk," he said. Wally lifted his butt up and planted it on a higher step. "I hope you're ashamed of yourself," he chided Roach, "abandoning poor Cordelia like that out there." Roach hiked an eyebrow up one notch. "Not particularly, no." He glanced at Cordelia and winked. Wally," he went on, "I'm getting out of here, and guess who's gonna help me?" Cordelia shook her head. "No way, Buster." "Fuck you," he snarled. "I'm trying to talk to my friend Wally here." Wally rose up. "You watch your mouth in front of her." "Watch this." Roach grunted and took 2 fistfuls of Wally's shirt. "You don't fuck with me, you little toad. You might want to die here, but I don't. Breaker says the long, tall dude wants that key, and I say we're gonna give it to him." Cordelia was on her feet now. "Haven't you caused enough trouble already? Can't you just leave a body alone?" He eyed her with fake indignation. "Excuse me, but this is a man-to-man, between pals, okay?" She narrowed her eyes. "Oh, he's not your pal, Roach. Assholes don't have friends at all, and you are most definitely an asshole." He released Wally. One hand snapped out and clamped around her wrist. "We got a few details to work out, Cordy. You come with me." He marched up the steps, towing her behind him. "Excuse us, Wally boy. That's a good sport." Wally raised a finger, opened his mouth, looked down at his hands, made fists of them. He took one strong step up to follow, wavered on the second, sat down on the third, and propped his chin on his hands. "Son of a bitch," he murmured. He glanced down and saw that Irene, seated at the desk, was looking up at him. "Son of a bitch," he screamed. "I'll kill him. I'll do it." Irene yawned. "Take a vow, you Wally. Better yet, take 2. He covered his face with his hands and groaned. Roach twisted the knob and kicked the door open, hit the light switch with his elbow, and pushed Cordelia across the room. She pitched onto the bed and bounced a few times, then sat up. He crushed the door shut and aimed a shaking finger at her. "Looky here, bitch. You go around telling people I went chicken shit out there, and pretty soon the whole town's gonna believe it." She closed her eyes. "What town?" "You never mind that, Cordy. You can screw Beaver Cleaver down there all night and all day for what I care, but don't you be telling people I'm chicken shit." "What people?" He took a step toward her. "Everybody I know, that's who. I got a reputation, and it don't involve the word chicken shit." "Actually," she said, "chicken shit is 2 words. Chicken, which you are, and shit, which you is." He crossed the little room in 2 rapid steps, cocking his arm. Before she could duck, he swiped his knuckles across her face in a vicious backhand that sent her head crashing against the wall. 2 of her framed pictures jumped off their nails and slid noisily to the floor. "Don't you fuck with me!" he howled to her face. His anger had caused a case of deodorant breakdown, and the smell drifting off him was thick and ugly. "You save your fucking for Beaver Cleaver down there, if he's even got a dick you can find without a microscope. You ain't nothing but a $2 whore, and he ain't nothing but another paying customer." Cordelia touched a finger to a corner of her mouth. Blood came away with it. "Get out," she said. "I'm tired of you," she said tonelessly. He eyed her, then the room, maybe searching for something to throw or break. In the end, he flapped his lips to imitate a fart, shuffled around, made the sound again, hauled the door open and stood there, then went out. Cordelia waited, listening. His feet thumped satisfactorily down the stairs, perhaps stopping at Wally's perch, but no arguing voices rose up, just Roach's laughter. Cordelia sank onto the bed while tears tried to rise hotly into her eyes, and begged those tears to go away. None of this was new to her. Over the years she had fallen for a dozen guys, hoped beyond hope that they would love her in return, and put an end to her humiliating career with the vow of marriage. Roach was only the latest in a string of broken dreams. She was dabbing at her nose with the corner of the bedsheet, trying to prepare herself for Wally, when a voice drifted into her ears. She frowned, shook her head, got to her feet, and listened hard. Poor Cordelia. She pressed a hand between her breasts, her eyes widening. Somebody was playing a guitar nearby, was serenading her. It seems downright criminal to treat such a pretty lady like that. Oh, did I say pretty? I should have said beautiful. The voice was coming through the window, had to be, as if Wally were hanging upside down with his heels hooked into the gutter overhead, singing while playing a Spanish guitar. Could it be? Was he so madly in love, and so acrobatic? She thought not. You are so beautiful to me, Cordelia. She went to the window, used her thumb to push up the little brass hook that kept it shut, and spread it apart. The man whom Breaker had been calling the salesman was standing below in the rain, wearing a jeweled sombrero, an exotic white shirt, and brown leather pants with sequins sewn down the seams. His guitar was glistening with raindrops, and he gently strummed at it as he gazed up at her. By some trick of the night, he was surrounded by an aura of pale blue, speaking to her from an oval of light. Poor Cordelia. His face seemed twisted with grief, his glistening eyes full with tears of pain for her. How you have suffered. I have, she said, leaning out. I have. I know. You are too beautiful. Just no one understands. Poor Cordelia. She pulled in a breath, but it caught in her throat. Wally does. And so have all the others, Cordelia. And they have murdered your heart. They thought you were a whore. That is a terrible word to use on someone who is really just a sad little girl, looking for love, isn't it? Twin tears dropped down her cheeks in unison. The salesman was right. Wally would pretend to love her for a few weeks and drop her. Every man before him had done the same thing, and all for a couple freebies, ripped her soul to shreds, just for some freebies. The salesman's voice was barely a whisper. I promise you my love forever, he said, and put his guitar on the ground. A moment later, he was scaling the gutter pipe as lightly and noiselessly as an angel. Rather than lean in through the window, he motioned her to lean out, which she did. He stroked her hair. Cordelia, my love, I have come for you at last. Thank you, she whispered, weeping with joy. His arms enfolded her. Their eyes locked. He kissed her long and hard. Wally jumped up when Roach clumped past him on the stairway. Roach grinned at him. She's all yours, pal. Hope you like sloppy seconds. Wally, who had 100 things to say to the bastard, 100 imagined karate chops to kill him, wound up saying and doing nothing at all. Roach laughed as he walked out of sight, while Wally performed a slow burn. The day would come soon when he would show Roach and everybody else the real man that was hidden inside his bony little body. Already he had saved a life and won the girl of his dreams. He only hoped the others here who had seen him slay the demon would shrug off his marksmanship to pure beginner's luck. For today he had to keep being Wally Enfield. In a few days they would all know his power, especially those dumb fucks at the post office. He turned to go upstairs, but hesitated. Of course, Roach had not been up there long enough to abuse her body, though quite surely long enough to abuse her mind. Probably told a batch of lies about Wally, Told her Wally was impotent or queer or a deserter from the Marines, something like that. So if Wally went barging up right now, she might turn on him, abandon her admiration, wreck his plans for marriage, point out that he was small and skinny and was getting bald real fast. He turned to go back down, stopped, and chewed on his lower lip for a trace of time. Turned around again. What had Roach said to Cordelia? What secrets had he exposed? Wally bought a Penthouse magazine every so often at the cigar shop in Avery, but who could know that? He had once run an ad in the Junction City newspaper, one of those personal ones where you try to get women to date you. But he had used a post office box for that fiasco, so then what? Maybe nothing. Maybe Roach had just been begging her for another chance. She was a fine catch in the elusive ocean of women. If so, she had rejected Roach and therefore aroused his anger. Wally had triumphed over Roach again. He took an upward step, stopped, and turned. What if Cordelia had locked her door? Not locked it against Roach, but against him. Maybe she... "Make up your goddamn mind!" Irene shrieked downstairs at the top of her lungs. Wally charged up the stairs. At Cordelia's door, he knocked softly, waited, gritted his teeth almost hard enough to break them, and knocked harder. No reply. Roach had murdered her. He pounded the door, beginning to sweat, waited, then gathered his courage and opened it himself, ready to see either Cordelia hating him or Cordelia dead. Both would be equally catastrophic. He eased his head inside. The light was off, but he could see against the backdrop of the window that she was standing there looking out into the night. His voice was husky and dry when he spoke. "Cordelia?" She said nothing. Lightning still flashed and popped in the distance. "Cordy? Can I call you that now? I won't if you don't like it." He heard her sigh against the window panes. His heart tumbled in his shoes. She was mad at him, or maybe just disappointed, or maybe loved Roach after all, and was going to hurl herself out the window. He advanced a step, 2 steps, and then 3. There was a weird burned smell in the room, as if she'd left a hot plate on too long, or let coffee in a pot boil down to fudge. Cordelia had not yet turned around, had not yet responded at all. She was wearing her familiar blue silk robe now, a gift from a boyfriend of the past. "Cordelia?" His voice was a tiny whisper. "Cordy?" She turned, just a shape in the dark. "Hello, Wally." He swallowed. His Adam's apple seemed to be jumping up and down in the parched throat, like a monkey on a stick. Are you okay?" She sighed again, but it was not a sigh of anger or scorn. "I realized something about myself tonight, Wally. My whole life, I've avoided the guys who truly love me, like you. You really do love me, don't you, Wally?" He took one of her hands and dropped to his knees. This night was so magical, so unearthly, so full of danger and promise, of strange lightning and new beginnings. "I have always loved you," he croaked, "from the first time I saw you get your mail out of the box here." She tugged him upward. "Look at me, my love, and let me look at you." He fell into her arms, hugged her fiercely, then pulled back to look at her. A brilliant strobe of lightning filled the room with sharp white lights. Cordelia was so flawless, so beautiful, her skin so porcelain perfect, that he could no longer speak. She took his head in her warm, gentle hands and silently pressed her lips against his. Okay, boils and ghouls, this has been chapters 8 and 9 of Demon Night. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed these 2 chapters. I loved them myself. I loved the fake out scare with the cat when the candle blew out on Geralene down in the basement. Sorry if I made anybody jump out of their skin with that cat noise, but you know, not a lot of action going on in these 2 chapters, not a lot of scary stuff, and I have to keep you on your toes, right? I mean, you are listening to horror novelizations, So there's got to be some scares in there sometimes, right? So if it was a scary movie, the cat would have been a jump scare. So I had to make the cat a jump scare in the audiobook as well. I do apologize if it scared the hell out of you, made you jump out of your seat. Hell, when I was just playing it back to make sure the audio level was correct, it made me jump and I knew it was coming. Anyways, besides that, I really enjoyed the scene with Roach and Cordelia. Roach is such a fucking asshole. But I really enjoyed the salesman with his whole, "Poor Cordelia, you're so pretty." Did I say pretty? I mean beautiful. You know, that whole thing. I love the parts of the movie where he's trying to get in the heads of the survivors. So I don't want to spoil anything for anybody that's never seen the movie or read the book, so I'm going to stop talking about that. Just saying I love it when the salesman is at his best, and that's what he's up to right there. So, what's going on with Cordelia? She was making out with the salesman a couple minutes ago, and then Wally comes up, and she's acting pretty strange. She's not talking like this anymore. It's more, "Hey, Wally." You know, she's more confident, and yeah, I don't have a good feeling about Wally's future. We won't find out for sure what's going on there until the next upload, which will be very soon. I'll be back very soon with more of Tales from the Crypt Demon Knights. Till then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, "Okay, kiddies, thanks for listening. Pleasant dreams, and we'll see you real soon."